So Christian and I were a little while ago batting around this issue that of the distinction between these attributes of mind and this thought and mind, and that the causal chains seem to be parallel but distinct. And so the extension and mind kind of run in parallel but don't actually interact with one another. But there's places in this section at the beginning of part 3 that seem to say that they do interact, and that's and I mean I'm willing to be convinced, I'm kind of assuming that it's a matter of interpretation, that it seems that way to me, but he's not actually saying that. But that sure is what it sounds like sometimes when he's talking about the like at P12 that Christian was talking about. The mind endeavors as far as it can to imagine those things which increase or help the body's power of acting. The human mind regards some external body as present, that is, imagines it. And so, so we were talking about earlier, a few minutes before you came in, this idea that Spinoza seems to have that the image is a physical impression, a physiological impression, but then the mind imagines something in parallel. But here it sounds almost causal, like the impression on the physiological, I guess the brain, somehow induces the an imaginative state. That's what at least what it sounds like just from reading it.
Yeah, I think to kind of keep the formal consistency, you kind of have to like first assume that just kind of like go follow the principle first and see if it works. And in that case, I think so anytime he's talking about the mind, we can kind of substitute that's the idea of the body. Anything that's about the body, we can substitute also that there's an idea about it that represents it. So in a way they can kind of get through a lot of things. And but specifically, I think he's talking about this whole process of how does affect work, and specifically in these kind of like imaginary ideas and whatnot. So the way that I think that is the key to it. So bodies will interact and they'll cause these images, which that's really important to note, that it is indeed, that is a corporeal thing. So I looked it up real quick. So I'm assuming that I'm just writing what I wrote down in the margins here. Images, the affections of the human body, ideas present external bodies. Ideas present external bodies as present. When the mind regards bodies in this way, it imagines. So there's that kind of, the objective being of the idea, in the sense that it represents, it's an idea of the body. And that's what's going on with images, in the sense that, they're affections of the brain that cause traces because of, we don't, obviously brain science, neurology has surpassed this by now, but his idea is that your brain is soft, and when things that are hard kind of impact it, the softness of the brain is what leads it to kind of keep these traces or imprints in it. So that's how he kind of assumes this sort of works, and that leads towards these images, which are indeed a physical thing. But like everything that's physical, there's also going to be an idea about it. But the whole thing, one thing that I think is really interesting about this whole idea of affect is that it's both an idea and
Mhm.
also a bodily interaction, a mixture of bodies. So it's kind of it's that's sort of difficult to figure out if you're thinking about like it has to be one or the other, because it really is both. The thing is that it doesn't really work in the kind of representational way that a kind of idea would work.
Is it
It's that it's a mode of thinking that, you know, it's determined by things, but then at the same time, it's also itself an interaction, of these ideas that are also at the same time these interactions of bodies and their images and whatnot. So yeah, there's a lot of great mixtures going on here. And what is this? It's kind of like a chemistry kind of thing where you've got all these mixtures, and the idea is how do we extract them? And then from that, we could extract joy, which is lovely.
so like I just to make sure I understand you, you said the affects were unique in this interaction, but from the way I understand it, if something exists in thought, it has to have a corollary and extension, right? Like there's no holistically and only in thought thing, right?
Yeah. So it does have a correlate. I think that what's unique though is that its correlate isn't purely just a representational relation. Does that make sense? Is okay.
Say that
Like,
again.
I'm thinking of the implications of if that were to be the case, right? If they're anything more than if the correlations are anything more than a difference in representation, then that seems to not jive with like Spinoza's parallelism. Because like if you add anything else onto that, I don't know how other than just being a reflection of each other, they could interact in any sort of way.
Yeah, so let's see what his definition says here.
For affect?
Yeah. So I'm just gonna read this. It's definition 3. By affect, I understand affections of the body by which the body's power of acting is increased or diminished, aided or restrained, and at the same time, the ideas of these affections. So yeah,
See,
I guess what it really is that it's that transition, it's that variation, that passage. That's really what the affect is, both in terms of a body, that it's this mixture, this interaction, this physical mixture interaction going on the body level, and then on the level of the mind, that's where you've also got an affect as an idea, which is going to be this you got joy, you got sadness, it's one or the other. You got this transition, this passage between, this continuous variation of increase and diminishment and whatnot. So yeah, I think that's yeah.
But they're not causing one another, right? In the sense that the physiological is not causing the what's happening in the mind, nor vice versa, which is confusing when he starts talking about, that the mind tries to imagine things that are, I can't remember,
I
good
think
for the body or something.
Yeah, I'm looking at that again, the P12, and I mean, I'm thinking it might be helpful to actually read through that, because I think, yeah, my mind wants to read that as if it's saying like the mind does this and this causes the body to increase its power.
Okay, just real quick before we do that, I want to make sure before we move off of this definition, and then we can go straight to that. This the ideas of the affections are so what do we call those things specifically again? Do we just call them the
That's an
ideas of the
affect.
affection? So
So
an affect is an idea of the affection, or are they the same thing, whether it's an
Correct.
extension
Yeah.
or in thought?
yeah,
So I could take this definition and I could replace mind with body everywhere. And then instead of saying the ideas of these affections, say the extension of these affections or whatever, and it would mean the exact same thing.
I believe so. Yeah. Well, actually, that would kind of go against my idea that there's so I think it's the affect is kind of a particular kind of mode of thought, in that so normally when he's talking about ideas, they have this kind of strict representational correlate with extension. Actually that's with all the attributes, but anyways,
Mm-hmm.
we only care about extension, so or in thought. So I think maybe kind of plugging that in with the formula, the parallelism formula, that maybe that wouldn't work. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, because it's just that interaction part of it is where is the circle that I'm trying to square right now. Because if I like just replace this definition by affect, I understand affections of the mind, by which the mind's power of acting or ideating or whatever is increased or diminished, blah, 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 blah. It seems like the way Spinoza uses it, that could almost be true, but it wouldn't work with the like interactionist interpretation of it. It would only work with like a strict parallelism where I almost wonder if he's trying to be communicative. And I'm not trying to like belittle Spinoza here, but instead of constantly telling us like, hey, this body and extension, this is actually just an attribute of an object substance object, substance as object. And we're just seeing two parts of that in attribute. And instead of constantly badgering us with that, he just comes back to the body. And it's almost, I don't want to say metaphorical as if he doesn't mean it, but as if he's trying to get us to think that way instead of literally body as extension, critically trying to understand that relationship that doesn't seem to mesh. I don't know. Maybe that's an interpretation thing. I don't know.
Yes. So I think on one level, when he does, so the idea is that don't mix causally between the two different attributes. That's what he wants us to avoid. Exactly kind of what Descartes is trying to ultimately say, that the mind can causally do things to the mind and vice versa. And so sometimes when he'll emphasize the body, or he'll emphasize the mind, it's usually I think he's usually doing that for a reason. In particular, that this really long, I think it's this, what is it, this second proposition, where we get the no one has yet determined what the body can do.
Mm-hmm.
You just want to
Yeah.
bring that because Deleuze says that.
True.
But,
Yeah.
so
I mean, it's great. It's a great
for me,
line.
getting back to the P12, so reading that, the tendency that the interactionist reading might have is like, oh, look, the mind is wanting to imagine something and influence the body, interact with cause the body a change. But like, on the parallelist, could we read that as saying the mind, as far as it can, strives to imagine those things that increase or aid the mind's power of imagining? Like, can we translate body's power of acting to like the mind's power of thinking or imagining?
Yeah, those are parallel. So not, yeah, the power of thinking. Yeah, I would say so. Those are parallel as well, in that, there's there's a power of acting. Yeah, that's kind of usually the one he'll go with. So what does that mean for a mode in the attribute of thought? That's the power. The power of acting is also the power of thinking.
Maybe I wasn't
So
putting that together. Those two powers, are those parallel too?
yeah, but in a way that's slightly different from the other kind of parallelism.
But
I mean,
for
I could
for all general purposes, let's just say this.
yeah, it's kind
But
of
so P12 there, is that a safe reading of just translating? Is he kind of showing how like the mind and the body striving is kind of towards the same thing to like increase its corresponding power?
yeah. So the mind, as far as it can, strives to imagine those things that increase or aid the body's power of acting.
So do a similar thing that Joey just did and see if I can translate this. So the mind, again, I have a different translation. So the mind endeavors as far as it can to imagine those things which are increase or help the idea of the body, that is the mind, and increase its power. And because these two things are because mind and extension are in parallel, in fact, what will also be happening is the body will also, an extension will be, I don't know, doing whatever the parallel process is that also increases its power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that kind of work?
Yeah.
Okay.
I definitely think so. Yeah.
The body's power of acting is an interesting phrasing though to me, because if I am a quadriplegic or paralyzed from, I don't know, the nose down or whatever, make something up, right? I'm incapable of engaging my physical body, but I'm in full of mind is what I'm going for, right? I can have ideas that would increase my mind's capacity to engage, like we're talking about, but I would have a really hard time saying that those ideas are increasing my body's power of acting. Now, unless we're going to say body's power of acting in this case is specifically referring to the brain's ability to come up with new and more interesting or innovative derivative ideas, etc. That to me doesn't sound like what Spinoza is saying, though, especially when he goes on to talk about like, yeah, this is what I mean by increasing the power of acting.
I feel like that feeds into, again, like, maybe why are you thinking, and does like thinking up a new abstract idea contribute to the body's increased ability of thinking? Or I guess I feel like maybe there's, and maybe I'm reading this into it, but like I found myself resisting what you were saying under the idea that if you think that you're thinking of something productive that has nothing to do with your body's capacity to kind of move and connect and act in relation to other bodies, that maybe you're not really like thinking of anything like, I guess, new or that increases the mind's capacity to think. I guess I'm and that's why I feel like I'm like, is Spinoza saying that, or am I reading this idea into him that is kind of like, almost to think productively is to like think in a way that involves like motivation or corresponds to like actual changes with bodies and relationships, as opposed to kind of just abstract thought. And I guess the idea being that like maybe, somebody who has a different body is, say handicapped in any way, to think very abstractly about different ideas might just kind of have nothing to do with their body. And we might argue like, what use is that thought? And I think it gets into that. To me, I see this kind of breaching into, I guess, I don't know, maybe it's Deleuzian, but I guess the idea of like, why are we thinking? What is the point of thinking? If not in a way that kind of like shifts relationships of bodies and kind of reorganizes things in the world, as opposed to kind of like, I just imagined a new thing. And I guess, I mean, maybe I'm wondering, like, would that show up in his distinction of, say, like imagination versus reason? But I don't know. I find myself resisting the idea that we would think in a way that has nothing to do with our bodies.
It's the
Yeah.
fact that he crosses streams here that's messing with me. If he said the mind, as far as it can, strives to imagine things that increase or aid the mind's power of acting or imagining or thinking or whatever, I would have no problems with this. It would drive completely. It's just him crossing streams like this. But yeah,
I mean, it's
even if we think about them from a parallelism, it's not the mind that's doing anything. It's substance that's actually doing something. And then extension and mind are just reflections of what's actually going on. So it doesn't even make sense from that perspective to say, oh, the mind is striving to, like, no, it's not. It's substance that is. And we're just seeing this thing that we're calling the mind kind of flapping around because it has to necessarily.
I'm reading this line kind of over and over in that P12, which says, human mind will regard the same body as present. Consequently, so long as the human mind regards some external body as present, which I'm kind of reading as like imagining something. That is imagines it. Well, I guess, yeah, that is imagines it. The human body is affected with a mode that involves the nature of that external body. I mean, I guess I'm reading that as him saying, like, when we're imagining something, the body is kind of influenced by that thing. And it's not, I guess it's not that imagining it like cues the body to experience that thing, but that our imagining it kind of corresponds to the fact that the body is in connection and is being influenced by it. So you might, I guess, like in that line of argument, again, I guess with somebody with a different body, you might wonder, like, what does it mean for them to experience or to think of something that influences their body, I guess, in a different way? I guess I'm thinking like they would still experience it or be affected in some way, but maybe it would just be a different affect. Maybe it would be like a sad affect versus a joyful affect in the case of like something that my body can do versus something another bodies can.
Yeah. I think so. He says, Spinoza, that those are correlate ideas, that an increase in the body's capabilities is also an increase in the mind's capacities. So, and also diminishments. Is, I think, yeah, it's this idea that, okay, we've got the mind, we've got striving, we've got imagination, and we've got the body's power of acting. So I think if you look at P12 here, the mind, as far as it can, strives to imagine those things that increase or aid the body's power of acting. So it's not saying that the mind is causing anything with the body there. What is the mind doing? It's striving to imagine things that increase or aid the body's power of acting. So because the mind, in this case, is something that is of the body, I think that's exactly what you would expect it to be doing.
Yeah, but what do you mean the mind is of the body? The body is not a thing in and of itself, like substance is. The body is a reflection of that, and mind is a necessary reflection of that. I don't know. That's we're dragging up old stuff here, but I feel like the rubber's really starting to hit the road as far as like these distinctions really matter. And maybe I'm just missing. I don't know. Is anybody else feeling the same way I am, or is it just me?
No, I'm in pretty much the same place. And when you say that both of these things are, are in a sense reflections of the one substance, I mean that's actually kind of what helps me maybe make sense of it, because you've got this one substance that's necessarily doing whatever it's doing, and it manifests in these infinite numbers of attributes, which all necessarily follow from this one causal engine, which is this one substance. And so that's, but yeah, but I mean, but then I, again, I like when you say, I mean, I have the same question, the mind is of the body. That doesn't make any sense to me, at least in this attribute dualism, because it's, once you then begin to talk about these attributes, again, they seem to be parallel but distinct as attributes. They're not ontologically distinct because they're both, as Christian said, reflections or manifestations of the one substance. Nevertheless, we experience them as mind and body. And I mean, would he say the mind is of the body? I mean, that seems to violate that parallelism thing.
The mind is the idea of the body. That's his quote. And it's
right,
like,
but it's the idea of the body.
right.
Yeah. So I guess this kind of gets into the two different forms of parallelism, which would be, okay, so one, okay, this is Deleuze, by the way. This is how he formalizes it. So ontological parallelism would be substance has a modification of itself, is, it's caused itself and all that. So substance has a modification, and then that modification is expressed in all of its attributes. And bam, you've got a mode in every attribute that is parallel or corresponds with that modification in substance. That's kind of like what it is, but it also is very much and very real in the sense that it's also an expression into all the infinite attributes. So there's a mode in every attribute that corresponds with the same modification of substance. So that's one. So then there's also epistemological parallelism, which is, so one thing is also with the ontological, that would be that there's a principle of equality there with the attributes. So none of the attributes have a kind of hierarchical, I don't know, position above another. Okay, so epistemological, this is between what is equal, the principle here in the parallelism is between two different powers that are also equal. So this is the power of acting or existing and the power of thinking, comprehending, understanding. So what goes along with this is that the attribute of thought has this special relationship with the power of thinking, and that it always has to correspond then with thinking. Okay, so think about it as like, okay, this is God, it's God's infinite power of thinking. So part of that is that God can think everything. So what does that mean? That means that there is a mode of thought that corresponds with every other mode in every other attribute. So basically there's a lot of thoughts going on. It's yeah. So what does that mean in terms of extension and the body? Well, it's kind of the same thing as every other attribute theoretically, in that for every mode, you've got also a mode corresponding with it in the attribute of thought, as a mode of thought, an idea. And what is that? That's that representational idea of it. So for anything that exists, that also has a power of thinking that is equal to it. So that's epistemological parallelism. So yeah, they're a little different, but that's kind of what's going on in terms of the powers. and at least it helps me at least understand some of what's going on. But okay, so I think to kind of go back to what Joey, what you're talking about with somebody whose body is handicapped or whatnot. So I think to kind of give a kind of let's just try to like defend Spinoza's idea here. So I think it would be something like Stephen Hawking. Okay, he's got great powers of thought, or had great powers of thought, but his body seems it's what Lou Gehrig's disease or whatnot. Okay, so what's going on with that? I would say, okay, his experience of his body is probably still really complex, and the sense that his mind also is quite advanced, that still allows him to have a quite complex relation with his body at the same time, which I think that's expressed in one sense in the fact that he's kind of a cyborg, or was a cyborg, whatever, the time isn't important, but so he's able to create these larger composite bodies because of his powers of thought. So I think that is quite significant, that there is definitely a bodily capacity that goes along with that. Because I mean, I don't know how to work like a machine thing. What is the voice thing he has? Yeah, I don't know how to do that. But then if there was some kind of like a brute, say, diminishment, I don't know, of my body, and I had to like try to recover with that, but at the same time my mind is still there to work towards increasing its own power and whatnot, I think there would be a way of thinking that, yeah, still your body, even in a state of like like the handicapped person could still have just as much power of acting, although it wouldn't be necessarily the way that we would normally think of it. But I think, yeah, it's a much more kind of, I would say, thorough kind of understanding of what those powers are. And I think the fact that they don't always seem to have like a clear term by term correspondence, that's actually what helps us to kind of think, okay, if there is something theoretically going on with my mind whenever there's something going on with my body, then there's a kind of impetus on us to think, what exactly is that? I've got something going on in my mind, there's something going on with my body, vice versa. So I think the fact that that they're not obvious is actually almost part of the method going on. And that's kind of what he's getting at in the long scholium, where he's deriding people that believe that they can choose to control the body based off of intentions and whatnot. So we don't yet know what the body can do. So what does he give it as examples? Sleepwalking, things like that, things people do in dreams and whatnot, which shows that, yeah, I think there is I think part of this arises because the way that these kind of natural illusions come about, where we're conscious of our desires, our appetites, and that leads us to think that we are the cause of them. There's this kind of just natural illusion kind of in the nature of consciousness that's like that. And that's why we emphasize consciousness as this causal agent so much. Also, I think you could maybe get a little Nietzschean or even Foucauldian here and say there's probably a reason in terms of power relations why the mind is emphasized like it is as this kind of moral agent, but yet so interesting that if it's not exactly so this idea, I mean, okay, the Descartes had, that I think Leibniz actually literally says that it's the principle of morality or something like that. That so this is actually a criticism I believe he had of Spinoza, where he said Spinoza, there's no morality, conventional morality going on in Spinoza because there's no way that the body has control over the appetites of let's mix that up. There's no way that the mind can have control over the appetites of the body, which has been a big theme in philosophy since Socrates, definitely Plato, Phaedo, yeah. So yeah, that's my at least that's the way I think of it.
When you were speaking, like in the first half of what you were explaining now, Chase, is that how you were understanding Spinoza? Is that connected to his P10 on page 76, an idea that excludes the existence of our body cannot be in our mind, but is contrary to it? I mean, I took P10 to mean, except for a moment that we have a mind, it is part of our body, right? I mean, our existence, our mental existence presupposes physicality. We have a physical body, and that's how I was interpreting P10, and that's what came to mind in the first half of what you were saying.
Yes, I think this is a little different. And okay, so the way that I understand, this has to do with the fact that he's going to say, okay, we've got these affects, these, increases or decreases in our power of acting. So what exactly really agrees with us that gives us, these affects? So he hasn't really explained that yet, other than to say that, oh, they agree or they disagree, So what he's going to say is that things can only really sort of couple together if they agree. So there's this which is based off of, so for the body, that would be the relations of motion and rest, speed and slowness, and but that's kind of, I think we'll eventually get there, but ultimately wants to say that these things need to agree, and that's why you can't have something that's kind of contradictory to what it is kind of within it. It's the same reason that he also so of course he doesn't talk about this because the concept's not invented yet, but something like a Freudian death drive would not go well with Spinoza, because what is that? That's something that excludes the idea of what it is, where what it is, in its essence as a striving conatus, what it is it seeks to persevere in its being. And that's kind of so the way he talks about that is interesting, in that there's kind of there's two different ways that he talks about this conatus, so one way is a kind of a way that's, I think, would go well with certain biological kind of ideas, evolutionary ideas. It's kind of like a survival instinct kind of thing, in that, just instincts of life to preserve life, that that makes sense. Preserve it as it is in its being. But then he also talks about it in the way of this is also an increase, a striving to increase your power of acting. Is that indeed is what the other, life preservation, it presupposes. What is that? How do you actually do that? You do that through striving to increase your power of acting. So I think that is significant, and also that's where it would so Nietzsche actually I'm basically actually kind of like reiterating what Nietzsche says about it, in that he says that there's an inconsistency with Spinoza, in that one way of phrasing this seems to be a different idea than the other, but really this other way is what should be emphasized. It's the increase of power. That's how you would actually preserve life to begin with. But that life preservation aspect is secondary. It's an effect. Really what's important is the increase of power. And yeah, that's also so Deleuze's reading of Spinoza is basically also, he says the same thing as Nietzsche for the most part right there too. Probably shouldn't surprise many people.
Wait, so I'm just to be clear, so there's places in here where Spinoza talks about this endeavor or this conatus as preserving, but are you saying that Spinoza also talks about it in terms of increasing power?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he talks about it in both ways, but the
Right.
criticism from Nietzsche is that that it really should only be talked about in the one way in terms of increasing power.
Yeah, or at least it should be understood that one way is primary and the other way would be secondary. I guess you would probably say that. But yeah, that goes into, okay, so that's why we can't have because something seeks to just join, just inherently, that's what this striving is. It seeks to join with those things that increase its power, or that also you'd see as preserving its being, because it does those. That at the same time entails that you can't have things kind of we can't. So at one level, the mind as striving, it doesn't seek to it's determined through this kind of conatus and all these ideas. It's determined to never seek something that would contradict it. That's kind of this whole basis of this sort of hedonic calculus that he kind of does, is that, yeah, we seek, there's like this attractive thing that is increase of power, joy, and then there's what contradicts my being, what decomposes my relation, that is sadness. And you got a whole bunch of complex interrelations that can occur from that. But yeah, does that make sense? That exactly why he says that, yeah, this is why we seek to increase our power of acting, and that's why we just can't have things that contradict our body, the composition of our body, or likewise the composition of our mind, because indeed they reflect each other.
It doesn't seem like you would have to have the increasing power in order to come to that conclusion. It would seem like, I'm not disagreeing with that Nietzsche or that Spinoza includes both, but it seems like even if you just said the conatus is a principle of preservation, even then, introducing things that decrease that power would eventually cause its destruction. So,
Right.
even just on those grounds, you could say, well, if anything that disassociates parts of it or whatever, one question I had with regard to that Proposition 10, and maybe this is pedantic or something, but when he said an idea which excludes the existence of our body cannot exist in our mind, but is contrary to it. And then in the demonstration, whatever can destroy our body cannot exist in it. I think of something like cancer or something of that sort. Again, maybe I'm just being, I'm not trying to do a gotcha. That's what popped into my head. I'm like, well, gosh, what about, something like cancer? It's in the body and it's trying to, or would he say that that's not actually in the body, that's like a foreign thing attached to it or something?
Yeah, I don't. So this is one thing I think is also not entirely clear, and that well, I mean, he could have possibly envisioned this, but there's not exactly microscopes. Yeah, he did lens grinding, and he was very interested in optics and whatnot, but indeed there's no I think they had just started, like, it was not too long after this. I think they had microscopes. I don't know, maybe if somebody knows, I'd actually be interested in hearing
They
that,
definitely knew stuff about nerves, and that because Descartes talks about that. They knew that there are nerves that transfer information into the brain. They didn't know how that worked, but they did know that, at least that much. So they were beginning to develop some root, because they would do vivisection on animals and poke their nerves and things, and so they were developing some really, at least, real basic physiological mechanisms.
yeah, it was, I think, the church or whatnot had banned things like autopsies, I believe, for a while. Isn't that right? And then it was just around the time, I think around Descartes' time, or I think a little before, that they started allowing people to actually do autopsies and things like that too. But even that probably would have been controversial, I think. So one reason is, okay, getting somewhat sidetracked, but the resurrection in the Bible, it's supposed to be bodily. It's like this idea of like a eternal soul. That's Plato. It's not Christianity. So sorry if bursting anyone's bubble, but yeah, the resurrection is supposed to be bodily. So yeah, don't mess with your body, because you need it for when the resurrection happens. That's why we Christian nation, I don't know, yeah. We bury people. That's our custom. We don't incinerate them in fire. Yeah. What was I getting at before? Yeah.
My understanding is that the microscope, something you could really call a microscope, was invented in the early 1590s in the Netherlands.
Oh, Netherlands.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess so indeed, Spinoza would have known about that, definitely, because he was a lens grinder in Netherlands after that. Yeah. So, but yeah, okay. So yeah, this is one place I think I cannot follow Spinoza to this, in the sense that it seems to me that our bodies are made of things that I think, yeah, there's something like maybe like a kind of inherent kind of striving within life, I think, but I think that's on something like a kind of like integrated level, but then things are composite, and we are made of a lot of things that I believe are just not part of us. There's no kind of just sustained identity of all of our parts with us. That's why our bodies are made of, tons of bacterial cells and things like that. So I think that, and also the fact that, cell death is kind of programmed into cells itself. I think that is also significant. So I think something like cancer is, on one level, that's something so one of my friends is a what a biochemist, I don't know, something like that. And she was telling me that if people found ways to kind of change the way that senescence or cell death, kind of like programmed cell death works in our body, that it would lead towards a whole bunch of new cancers, and basically it would not work. That it's actually a very smart construction that you have kind of this programmed time limit to cells, but yet they're supposed to be renewing at the same time. So there's actually a problem. Yeah, definitely, when you get cancer, but at the same time, it's a part of obviously a natural bodily process that's just simply gone awry, and that it doesn't know when to stop forming. So I think at least Spinoza would probably, if he fast forward to now, he would say something like, yeah, this is still part of the body's overall activity, except in this case, yeah, it's been determined from outside in some way to where now it's working against itself. But yeah, I would say again, I don't find that totally convincing, because it seems to have some kind of like really sharp distinction between internal and external, and I'm not what exactly does that, where is that distinction? I'm not sure. Yeah.
May I ask a different question? I apologize for being late. I honestly did not realize what time it was. On page 73, it's
Oh, that's the really long, that must be the second proposition.
yeah, but it's, as you say, it's very, very, very long. It's part of P2. I had forgotten it was part of P2, but it says it's the second to the last full paragraph on the bottom of page 73. I think that's what it is. But if we had not found by experience that we do many things, we afterwards repent, nothing would prevent them from believing that we do all things freely. And then to me, he kind of just develops that thought in the next two paragraphs. And then on page 74, he says, those therefore who believe that they either speak or are silent or do anything from a free decision of the mind dream with open eyes.
Yeah, that's based off. Doesn't he say something about dreams? Okay, so yeah, he says some stuff about dreams that, okay, yeah.
It's the last sentence. What I read was the last sentence before P3 on page 74.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hate asking this question, but is he saying everything's already determined?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
that's what I thought, but I was going to defer
Yeah,
to you.
there's no kind of cross determination with the mind and the body, but at least the word already kind of bothers me, because that I like to believe that this is probably actually not reflective of Spinoza. This is my own thing, probably, but because the Bergsonian aspect of my mind would does not want to say that it's all kind of there. Uh, all of time and history is already kind of planned out. I like to think that this is just something that is occurring now constantly. There's this constant production of things, and yeah, those things are indeed determined. But yeah, the idea that everything was determined, from the very beginning, that just bothers me. But that's just me. I don't know. But yeah, that's I think that is a striking line. The dream with open eyes. So if we dream, yeah, it seems like I'm making free decisions to do things. And he's saying, yeah, we're doing the same thing, but with our eyes open.
Yeah.
Willfully ignorant is what he's calling them.
Yeah, I think so. I like the idea that he has this, at least a kind of premonition of, I think this is really almost so Kant's idea of transcendental illusion, that inherent to reason, it comes up with these illusions. I think that idea is interesting, and I think he also has something kind of like that, not for reason, but for, I think, consciousness, probably, in that we're conscious of these desires, our appetites, and we think that is what causes them, because we're conscious simultaneously of this kind of striving in our mind, our desire, our conscious of our striving, at the same time that our body is determined to do what it does. Because yeah, again, it's kind of, you see, okay, there's some kind of like a correlation, but correlation doesn't show causation. I think something kind of like that. And saying that, but we're kind of programmed in another sense to do exactly that, to think that there's something more than just correlation. Although on one level, I think that's also for a good reason, in that so a lot of this, what he's talking about, with detailing these basic types of emotions, it's all kind of like a very just practical, common sense, associative kind of thinking about things, of, oh yeah, this thing that I hate, when something destroys it, that makes me happy. I wonder why I picked that example.
I can think of people that when terrible things happen to them, it makes me happy.
Yeah. So I see that Eric is not here, but so I'll go ahead and give this example because I like it. So Eric is a fan of Manchester United Football Club, and they have an arch rival, Liverpool Football Club. And last weekend, Manchester United, so full of pride, in Spinoza's definition of it, as an overestimation of their ability, I guess. So they lost 7-0 to their arch rival Liverpool, and I admit that I've seen the highlights. I've looked at the highlights, I think 3 times now, and watched 20-minute response videos where so these people record themselves watching the game. So you get to see their reaction to all 7 goals being scored against them. And it's brilliant. I love watching it. I felt kind of bad for Eric, but then it was like, oh well, yeah, that's what you get for supporting Manchester United. Yeah.
Well,
But-
Eric was devastated over that game because it
Yeah.
wasn't just the loss.
He should be. It was
7-0
awful.
is like what, like 42-0 in US football? I mean, you just don't usually have that kind of scoring.
Yeah, it's like probably like 50 something. Yeah. Really bad.
So I'm
But yeah.
guessing, but I want to follow through on this. So it's because it's Manchester United that you took joy in Eric's grief. So what if it was reverse?
Oh yeah, so okay, so
If Liverpool had lost 7-0
Yeah.
to Manchester United, would you be sad?
so so I'm not a Liverpool fan. I'm an Arsenal fan. But
Okay.
Arsenal, indeed, they're rivals with Manchester United.
Ah,
So the reason why I was happy, okay, the thing is, I'm not a Liverpool fan. So when they actually lose badly, I actually like that too. But
Oh,
not as much as I
oh,
like
so you
I
like both?
Manchester United losing way more because I hate them more.
Why?
I would say because there's a reverse or an inverse relation between usually our success and theirs.
Oh.
So I think that would go along with Spinoza's kind of calculus of the affects here. Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, I'm not just saying that, but I do think that in the way you described your happiness and sadness, it seems very Spinozian in the way he was relating it.
Yeah. I mean, when I was watching those videos, I was thinking of the Spinoza stuff simultaneously, and yeah. Oh, Arsenal might win the title this year. I've been a fan for since 2010, and they haven't won the title, I think, in like 20 years or something. So it was before I was a fan. But who knows? I know there's still lots of like 12 more games to play, so we'll see. You know, this I almost want to tell my thesis advisor. Okay, I'm getting really off track here, but that part of the reason like why my thesis has been a little shaky is because I'm so engrossed in this title race because the team that I've been supporting for 12 years, and then I flew over to England to watch a game. That team, they could actually win it. Who knew? It's amazing. Okay, no, enough about Arsenal. Yeah, poor Eric. So I will say this is the thing I would say about sports, you know, kind of like fanship and whatnot. Or I think this extends to a lot of things. This you could have like definitely some political kind of concepts come out of this and about group membership, and that when you take people as these kind of anonymous groups, it's a lot easier to have that kind of Schadenfreude, you know, about them. You're like, yeah, I hate them, or something like that. You know, I wouldn't say that I hate like these fans or whatever. I hate more like the fictitious group entity that is Manchester United more than like the individual people. Of course, they're fine. Well,
But I mean,
some-
didn't you say that we could transpose your analysis from these football sports clubs to countries, couldn't we?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, easily it's like, oh, yeah, I like talking to an individual German, but I effing hate Germany. I mean, it's like, what's going on here, right?
Hmm. Yeah. And that people, so a lot of times, when people have this kind of hatred of some abstract group, a lot of times it's because they don't really know, they don't have personal relations usually so much with those people. And sometimes, it's a case of, oh, well, that's because they hate the abstract group to begin with. And that's why they don't. And usually the way that kind of you can break through those things is by having suddenly, individuating that relation so that it's not just simply this abstract group. But I could possibly make that relate to Spinoza, but I'd probably be trying pretty hard. Yeah. But yeah, the affect thing definitely. Yeah, it makes sense to me. It almost like it was kind of so reading the details of the affects, part of this was the part of this the third part that I skipped because it seemed like it was just saying the same thing to a certain degree. But yeah, it was kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, that makes sense. Okay, yeah, I can go with that. But yeah, at the same time, I thought it's interesting that he shows how we can actually have these very we can be determined by these affects in a way that does not at all reflect their nature, in the sense that they actually do increase our power, decrease our power, and that it works through this kind of associative imagination kind of thing, which I think helps explain a little more, why he thinks the imagination that's the realm of inadequate ideas, which doesn't mean that they're entirely false or whatever, but he's really given the details of why, I think, in this chapter here, by showing that, oh yeah, I got attacked by a dog when I was a little kid, but now I hate dogs. I don't really hate dogs, by the way. But I actually really did get attacked by a dog when I was a kid. But something like that. Yeah.
I thought when he used the term inadequate, it reminded me of the word incomplete.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah. So I think he uses the term partial,
Yeah.
as almost like a synonym for inadequate.
Yeah.
This would be something, okay, so when we have an affection, so a body will interact with mine. So he's saying that the problem is usually we will understand the affection through the way that it affects my body, instead of I'll think of the body that is affecting me. I'll think of it objectively is what it is like what it is, but I do that based off of this projection of how it affects me. So, okay, one example I'll give is, so I was talking to Hunter about Hegel over Discord, because he sent me this thing about Hegel, and I read it, and then I was like, okay, yeah, this is interesting. There's a lot of connections with a kind of like Christian Hermeticism here that I find interesting. And then he kind of downplayed that idea, and then I was thinking, oh, well, this is just kind of how Hegel affects me. This is what I've kind of latched onto, but then I've inadequately kind of projected it into like Hegel himself, rather than seeing that, oh, this is Hegel's affect on me. So I think, yeah, that's kind of what he's talking about. And that's a partial way of understanding it. So I think a complete way of understanding it would be you understand both bodies and the relation between those two, and how they agree or they contradict each other. And that's the art of common notions.
Yeah, and then I'm sorry, I'm going backwards. I apologize, but I mean, from what you said, Chase, it just seems like he's arguing. I mean, he uses the word passions. He does use the word desire, but my memory is that he says desire is when we're self-aware of
Mm-hmm.
of appetite. I think he said desire is when we're self-aware of our appetites, but I didn't get a sense of him really explaining passions. But it's in P3 on page 74 that he says the actions of the mind arise from adequate ideas alone. The passions depend on inadequate ideas alone. Is he suggesting? Is he a neo? Is he a pseudo neo, or well, it can't be neo because what neo mean today? But what would you call someone who's following Plato in the 1600s? I mean, is he saying we wouldn't have these strong emotions if we actually understood more clearly and completely the world that we live in?
Not exactly. I think it's more so passion is Robo Joey.
I said, I think it means something very specific, like passion. Can you hear me?
It's breaking up, but I could kind of make out a little bit. My cat is sneezing. I wonder if anyone could hear that. Probably not. Yeah, Joe, I think the internet connection is bad. But yeah, so the passions, that's going to be affects where we're externally determined or caused. So, which means we're also, as far as we're being affected, we're always a partial cause, because indeed, it matters, what I am and how it affects me. But the this idea of kind of an active affect, that's what would be opposed to a passion. So the etymology of passion, so that relates to this Latin word, which means basically suffering, like a patient. That means someone who suffers. And I think if you understand passive and passion in the same way, and how that would have, so in this kind of 17th century philosophy, they understood passion as meaning something like that, like a kind of emotional suffering inherently. I think Spinoza, he still obviously has some of that, and that, yeah, these are but it's like he says at the very beginning, that we should not just a priori deride these affects, and so we should understand them. So I think, yeah, part of that is he's taking this idea of passions, but instead of saying just like, okay, yeah, they're just bad, and the active affects are good. Instead, I think he has a little more of a nuanced way of saying, okay, yeah, passions are these passive affects, but indeed by understanding them, we can turn them into active affects where we're the adequate cause, by the fact that we understand kind of the full causal situation, the full causal interaction kind of going on with these things. Yeah, that's the way I see it.
But it's an interesting notion of causation, since he's a determinist. It's that, like you said, it's actually a understanding of what is causing these things. So it's not like I am some soul that is causing these affects. It's rather, when I really understand all the causes, I can understand what's happening, as opposed to merely suffering something that I don't understand completely. Is that the idea? Like, if I have an adequate idea, I actually understand what's going on. And so it's not passion, and that I'm not merely suffering this experience, but I actually understand what's happening. Whereas when I don't completely understand, it's like something's happening to me and I don't really get it. I don't understand why this is happening to me. And that's that feeling of a passion. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Y'all hear me?
Yeah.
What?
Can y'all hear me?
I can hear you now.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I guess I had a question that popped up whenever Chase was talking about the Hegel mysticism thing, and about, our interpretation of like the affection, or the object versus the way it affects me. And when you said common notion, with the extraction of the common notion, I guess to me, I'm thinking like, what is a common notion? Like in a concrete example. And in that example, would the common notion be understanding how both, say, Hegel and Christian Hermeticism affects you, and kind of taking that kind of commonality out of the object itself, but understanding that like that's a way that your body is affected?
So the affection would be kind of at least in the sense that we're talking about the inadequate idea aspect of it, is that this would be the way that it's partial to my own way of being affected, but I misconstrue it as something about Hegel himself more so. So I think that's kind of the operation
So
would be.
I guess I hear the difference between like, oh, Hegel is Christian Hermeticism versus Hegel affects me in a similar way that Christian Hermeticism affects me.
Yeah. And which
I guess I'm like wondering what is the common notion? Is the common notion like the way that both of those affect you? Or is the common notion like something?
So the common notion, I guess you could maybe see that, okay, the way that it did affect me in a way was because there is some kind of a common notion there. And that's how, so there's always common notions involved, insofar as, if anything, even the most, opposed bodies, by the fact that they're both modes of extension, they'll at least agree upon that. So they'll agree that, they're individuated by relations of movement and speed and whatnot. And they can interact based off that. So there's an aspect where common notions are involved in something like that, even these inadequate ideas. But that would be kind of really, maybe this isn't the right term, but kind of the objective truth of, or the formal reality. I think that would be the Spinoza's term for it. So the formal reality of what was actually going on, of the affection. If I understood that, I'd understand that that's because of these common notions that my mind and its affects, where I'm just like, oh, joy, Christian Hermeticism. Actually, not that it gives me that much joy, but a little bit enough. And then I see that in Hegel, and I'm like, oh, I can make this connection here. And I think the way that there's enough similarity that I can make those connections where that it does have that affect, that's kind of what the common notion would be. It'd be something really particular in this case. But so I was actually thinking when I first said that, more so, okay, so this is really how I believe the art of common notions more so would work, would be, okay, I see Hunter's point, and then I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm overemphasizing these traits of Hegel. Instead, if I tried to look for ways that Hunter and I could agree about something about Hegel, where there could be a convergence, a commonality between all three of us, me, Hunter, and Hegel, to where we have this kind of this greater individual that kind of forms with that, or let's just call it a relation.
So that's interesting. But couldn't you also argue, like, are you not forsaking your, say, relationship to Christian Hermeticism by maybe detaching the likeness of Hegel and Christian Hermeticism? Like, yeah, I mean, you're kind of just shifting your body's composition relationship. But I guess maybe I'm wondering, maybe it would serve you more to disagree with Hunter.
Yeah,
but in the case of,
yeah, that makes
don't know.
sense. That there would be, you probably have to sacrifice some common notions probably to form others. That makes sense. Yeah. So, if I suddenly, I don't know, if I end up just spontaneously going over to some foreign culture and I suddenly have to live there, I will then immediately have to, start building common notions with a new language, so that we have something in common, so that we can get on the same kind of wavelength in terms of the relations of motion and rest and whatnot. So that we can form a good kind of socius together. And I don't just like sit there with the person that no one can understand. I would need to probably learn the language and probably adopt some of those customs, and that would require that I'd have to probably drop some of my current ones. So yeah, I think
So
that's definitely involved.
I guess, I mean, when we're talking right now, it feels like kind of concrete and down to earth, like just finding commonalities between people or bodies that kind of helps them cooperate more. But I guess when I read it in Spinoza, it feels like he's talking about how to understand, say, like your own body, or understand your own existence, or understand an idea. And I guess that to me feels a little bit more abstract, and I'm not sure how to go about it. And I'm wondering have I unnecessarily conceived it as abstract, or is it a little bit more, I don't know.
Yeah,
Are we oversimplifying it?
I think so. Not a great deal, but I think for all these examples, I would say to a certain extent that's definitely true. Although, what is it that we're meant to understand so that we can, understand something and have these common notions about it? I think it's kind of like what I was saying to Nevitt in the Discord about, what is a mind? If you think of the mind as indeed it's a power of thinking, it's a power of activity. If you think about it in those kind of process terms, I think it starts to make more sense. So in this case, it would be something like, okay, understand. So the way that I could build my hypothetical, let's go with like learning the foreign language example. So something like that would involve definitely doing something with the power of acting for both my body and mind simultaneously. like the way we were describing. So yeah, I think if you understand it on that level, it isn't so much something like, okay, I need to understand, the biological structure of the way that my what is it called, phonology, or oh god, I think I just butchered that word, but where you study the sounds that a language makes, blah blah blah, phonology. Yeah, so I don't have to be a linguist, in order to understand, or an anatomist of vocal cords and whatnot, in order to understand this foreign language and kind of build that up. I think it's really that kind of living power that's just kind of you follow affectively. I think that is more kind of what he has in mind. Although, of course, that also would include, something something more abstract, or also something more kind of like a theoretical way of understanding something. So if I did want to become a linguist in order to learn this language, I think that also would be, in a way, forming some kind of a common notion, although it probably not get me so far with the locals, but at least I could at least maybe talk to some other linguist. Yeah. I'm trying to still
I
keep
guess
it concrete.
from that, it sounds like, I guess to me it's reminding me of maybe what I was trying to say earlier about like adequate understanding of something is not abstract, but it is always kind of geared into our relations with like real other bodies.
Yeah, I think so. But then the weird Spinoza's thing is that also means that it's relations with ideas, but they're relations that are of those bodies. So
It's interesting to think, I don't know, like I'm like, the thought just came to mind, like to understand something is to kind of be, I get like to adequately know it. I don't know, because I feel like I was about to say to adequately know it or understand something is like to be, under this idea of kind of having the common notion in place, like to be affected by it, to affect it. But then I'm wondering, like, how does that different from like the passions versus actions, where the passion, right, is being affected by something external. And maybe I'm guessing, like,
yeah,
I guess a thought I had too reading Spinoza is like, some of the things he hints at, do we come to know external bodies, or is it just about knowing our own body?
I think the idea would be so the common notions would be ways of understanding both our body and how it's affected, and also external bodies, and also the relations between them. So I think that's what he has in mind in order to get a kind of a full idea of the cause there. It would need to be something like that. Although I think I don't think he would. There's always going to be passions and inadequate ideas. No matter how much we understand something, I think he would still say that, yeah, you can only make kind of really just kind of dense. Maybe certain like big things you can kind of understand adequately, but there's just kind of a baseline of constant inadequate ideas that are swarming us that I will easily fall into. So I think that's going to be it's going to be a constant thing. But Yes,
I guess
wonder-
to Nevitt's point, because I think that's maybe the idea that I was kind of reaching from. And then I feel like I almost get this like what I associate with like a Stoic idea. And I don't know where Spinoza is going to take this idea of like freedom, but I get this almost Stoic idea where it feels like he's saying, you know, just figure out how your body like responds to things, and you won't be surprised anymore by how things affect you. But it's not necessarily about knowing about other things or other people, but just kind of come to peace with how your body works, how you're affected, you know, how ideas affect you. And then just that is the adequate idea. Like you understand it, stop being so, you know, passionate.
I think to some degree it is kind of like that, but the third type of knowledge, intuition. So once again, I haven't read that part, but I believe the knowledge that we have from that is other things' essences, insofar as God has them. So I think that would definitely require some kind of I guess what we could at least, you know, tentatively call objective knowledge of them in some way. But then I think, so I guess at least the way I'm kind of thinking, I'm imaginatively projecting kind of what that third knowledge, the third type of knowledge would be like. It'd be something like, okay, I have a total understanding of what something's essence is, in the sense that how that essence can also relate to mine, and that I can understand that relation, I guess, completely. I don't know. Spinoza would probably want to say that. But I don't know. I'm just thinking hypothetically there anyways.
Intuitive knowledge is wild. I did we read through that part, or is that for next reading? I'm sorry, I can't.
It doesn't sound familiar to me, and I haven't read.
Yeah.
No, that's the last part.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it stuff's wild. I don't know. I'll have plenty more questions when we get to that. I'll just save them
Yeah.
for then.
So there's a Deleuze essay called "The Three Ethics," and in it he argues that there's three books in this book. So one is all the linear progression of the argument in all the, you know, the propositions, demonstrations, you know, all these things. He says, yeah, that's kind of like this steady river going through. But then there's also the scholia. That's another book within this book. And there's, at the same time, they're also, you know, it is one book, but he's saying there's three books in this one book. Scholia are like another book within it to follow a different kind of, so what makes it individual for Spinoza? Relations of speed and slowness, motion and rest. He's saying that these different aspects of the ethics have indeed different relations of speed and slowness, motion and rest. They follow a different kind of movement. And guess what the third one is? It's part 5 of the ethics, where the way he describes it, it sounds insane. It sounds, he talks about it as like lightning fast intensities and all this. So he uses a lot of kind of aesthetic ways of describing it. So he describes all the different ways in terms of different painting techniques and styles of light, because he had just written the books on cinema, and also the Francis Bacon book. So anyways, actually I really recommend that essay. It's really good. It will definitely, so it will at least it had this effect on me. It made me really want to read the ethics. And I was like, oh my God, that sounds incredible. These lightning fast flashes of speed of thought in the fifth part is the way he describes it, as these contractions that move in infinite speeds of zigzags and whatnot. Sounds pretty cool. I don't know. So guess we'll see when we get there. I guess for right now we're still kind of following the slow river, the propositions and the demonstrations and all that. I see David's comment there. Yeah.
Seem to want that intensity of experience.
Indeed. Where's
Well,
Hunter?
with the silence. I mean, I recall again the intuitive knowledge, or the third kind of knowledge. And I don't know if Chase, you'd fill this in, or if it's even worth going down this rabbit hole, but I do recall one of the chapters in Deleuze's Expressionism, which is the other text on Spinoza, where he kind of talks about Spinoza's method. And I guess he's kind of, I get to me pointing out, or maybe a response to what I was just saying of like, do we just know our own bodies? What can we know? What's capable of being like adequately understood? And I feel like Deleuze talks about Spinoza's method, comparing it to Descartes' method. And it kind of, I guess he talks about like how Spinoza kind of joins almost Descartes and Aristotle, and this kind of, I guess, synthetic method in contrast to Descartes' analytic method. And these words, don't mean much to me. I don't know if this makes sense.
Yeah.
But I remember him saying that like Spinoza, once he gets to the idea of God, something about the idea that like everything else kind of is just unfolds. And it's almost, he talks a lot about this spiritual automatism, which I don't know if Spinoza uses those words, but I think it translates in Spinoza to just the fact that the ideas in the mind all flow of necessity once you kind of get to like God as the cause. And I guess maybe I'm like trying to understand what you were saying, Chase, about understanding essences or intuitive knowledge. And it's like, do we get to that state where, to me, this seems, I guess, kind of mystical, or almost like, this mysterious absolute knowing, but of kind of just like where we realize something about God or the third kind of knowledge, and then poof, everything makes sense. But I think Deleuze's point about like Spinoza, this is his method, is that the beginning of the text is, his metaphysics is he's trying to get to the ideas as quickly as possible. And then once he gets there, it's like the rest of the book just kind of flows as if like, oh, he just kind of is using this method, and there's nothing to really think about from there. It's just kind of just keep going, just follow the propositions. But,
yeah. Yeah. So that part of the book, I remember reading that and being like, what the hell is this? What, synthetic? How is it synthetic? And I remember not really understanding it and getting bored quickly. So I'll say that I really don't know.
Always count on Chase.
but I, from what you just said, I think I could actually put it together at least enough. Okay, so yeah, that the spiritual automaton, that I think that's important, and the fact that he gets the idea of God as quickly as possible. That's kind of, so I think for that he may be talking about not the ethics, but one of these earlier treatises he wrote.
Yeah. What's interesting, because he says in the other treatise, Spinoza proceeds as if you can use geometry, so we can take like a shape and proceed to some sort of like knowledge of maybe what we call God or nature, and then that allows us to actually like know real things. So he says like we can take a fiction arrive at a truth and then like unfold reality. And then I think Deleuze says that in the ethics, Spinoza actually doesn't proceed from a fiction, but actually proceeds from something like real in the world. And I do recall, like, and I guess, you know, we've talked about this over and over, and I guess maybe it's hard to find, or it seems like some of y'all have not agreed with this, but just the rationalist empiricist kind of debate. And I do recall, like, Deleuze makes the argument that Spinoza will like recognize or use empiricist arguments, but he uses them like to further like a new rational approach. You know, they're like underneath, they're prioritized under the kind of rationalists.
Yeah, actually, so that part in particular I read again somewhat recently. So I remember that part. So the that method that I think, so the spiritual automaton would be, once you have an adequate idea, the other adequate ideas are supposed to flow from those. So I think that coming to where he, you know, does what he can, you know, strives to the best of his ability to get to that point of the adequate idea of God, and that's kind of the fulcrum, I guess. And from there, the spiritual automaton works in a kind of more or less automatic way. So that sounds a lot like the way that he talks about, you know, it's kind of one of these kind of typical Deleuzian reversals where he's saying that, well, actually, it's kind of, Spinoza has a lot of these too. Like, it's not that we judge something is good and then we desire it, you know. Wait, did I get that mixed up?
No, that's right. He says we desire things, and then we call them good because we desire them.
Correct. Yeah. So the way that he kind of is a reversal of that common sense kind of way of thinking about it. Yeah, that it's a common Deleuzian thing too, and he does that with ideas. So he says, yeah, for Spinoza, it's not so much that we have ideas; it's more like ideas have us, and they kind of flow through us, and we're just kind of, you know, along for the ride. And that's also that's definitely how affect is described. And so yeah, I'm just trying not to get too much specifically into Deleuze, but why not? We're already here. So yeah, and some of the other books he's going to do, it'll be much more, yeah, that affect is basically defined as something that these are, you know, and that's, so they're distinct from emotions that a subject would have. Instead, they're affects that kind of flow through you, that affect you, but you don't have them in this kind of possessive sense. And the same thing with percepts. So percepts are different from perceptions. Perceptions, that's something that a subject has, but a percept is its own entity. So it's actually kind of, so, okay, we're really going to the deep end here. But the idea of hyperstition.
To pause and process about that. So I guess the affect is almost like your experience of the arsenal thing versus maybe like an emotion being more directly related to your kind of subjecthood. But like, would you be, say, the affect of joy and sadness you experience from your soccer team winning or losing, or their rival winning or losing?
Yeah, so I think it's almost, you know, you can maybe connect this with those illusions of consciousness I was talking about, where if I think that I'm causing this emotion, that would be something like, oh, that's the emotional aspect, the subjective aspect that I think I have of it. But really, what is actually occurring is the affect. The affect has me. And that's totally true. I think so. That's definitely true for sports stuff, especially. I have tried to stop liking Arsenal multiple times, many times. I can't do it. It doesn't work. Like I am literally trapped in it. I'm trapped in an affective of like I don't associative structure. I don't know what you call it. I could not. I will always for probably as long as this kind of intensity kind of keeps going of this association of or the whole thing he's talking about, the loved object you associate with your joy and whatnot, as long as that's kind of going on, and now it's been so long that I've had probably quite a few repetitions, though at the same time I've also had lots of sadness from Arsenal, and that's why I've tried to stop liking Arsenal at the same time. But there's always just enough about it that always keeps me going. And that's why I cannot choose to do otherwise. It doesn't work. I cannot just suddenly decide to be a Manchester City fan or a Chelsea fan with their billions of dollars of oil money. Couldn't do it. Especially not Chelsea. Fuck Chelsea.
Begging your pardon, but aren't those two different issues? I mean, for you to have this affection that you can't quite explain why, and you're saying you can't imagine never having that feeling towards the team, is different from saying you can't imagine switching, and because you even gave a specific reason, all that oil money, they're oligarchs and they're whatever. Does that make sense? I mean, I can, to me, those are two different things. I can see you logically, because of your value system, for lack of a better term, not wanting to support a team that you think is owned by, or is actually owned by, extraordinarily rich people who you think might be destroying the planet. But it sounded like your affectation for the team you are connected to now, begging your pardon for saying it this way, isn't necessarily logical.
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely not. It's definitely not. And I mean, Spinoza, I agree in the sense that he says, yeah, affects are not inherently logical or rational. I guess you'd probably want to say that, yeah. And that's, I mean, if you know anything about sports fans, it is absolutely the most irrational thing. I mean, I think, so I'm not a gambler or anything. I hate gambling, but I've heard it's something kind of like that. And I feel like a lot of the times what I'm doing is I'm gambling with my affects, and that if Arsenal does well, I definitely feel joy. When they don't do well, I definitely feel sadness. And it's kind of like gambling with your nervous system or with your affects or whatnot. But yeah, I think that is right in the sense that, yeah, there's there's definitely an aspect of Chelsea that I just don't like, but it's almost kind of like the overall kind of situation. I would say that not only that the fact that I'm affectively addicted to Arsenal, but also, I mean, it's definitely possible that I could switch, but it would require something like a really strong common notion with another team. So if there's some great team, I don't know, that went along with let's go with a kind of like what we call, okay, there's this hypothetical team that goes along with my like values and like my political leanings and whatnot, and they're a real option there. I think that would definitely be easier to form a common notion with, and then to switch allegiances, to quit Arsenal and go with this other team. But that's never going to happen because I'm way too invested in Arsenal, and there's no other team that would, yeah.
I guess I'm hearing, so this idea that you're playing with of like finding the common notion to help yourself switch, but how would that
Oh yeah, but
combat
I don't want to.
the
right
irrational investment that you have with the present relationship? And I mean, I feel like, you know, I think there's probably in somewhere in here that Spinoza addresses that, but just I guess I'm thinking, to me, what's interesting here is the difference between forming a relationship versus like what that relationship becomes sustained by. And, you know, like, I mean, Ed, you said value system. And it's like what sustains the irrational kind of affect gambling relationship versus the idea that of kind of recognizing that it might be more rational for you to support a different team and to kind of like shift and form a new relationship. But it's like you're not necessarily at that point you're not combating like a common notion or something rational in your relationship with the old, right? It's like there's some sort of like attachment, you know, like
Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering like what, you know, I guess that's interesting to me. But I'm also thinking of it in that kind of addiction lens.
Yeah.
But of you know, forming new relationships with other bodies versus actually detaching from old systems of bodies, relationships.
Well, the team that you're very associated with now, I apologize. I had to get up at about 5 o'clock this morning because my car's not working and I had to get to school, and the only time a friend could drop me off. So I was at my office at 6 this morning, and I'm not used to that. But when you were forming the association with your team, was that at the same time that you were learning about soccer, learning about, you know, European global football? Were the two together?
In a way, yes. So this is actually, I think, supports the kind of overall theme of, you know, using this as a illustrative example. Okay, so I became an Arsenal fan because my brother I was living with my dad, and my brother started living with us, and he was already an Arsenal fan, and he would put the game on in the living room and make a big deal out of it, where if Arsenal won, there's good times all around, good vibes, and if Arsenal lost, there's a lot of sadness going on. So naturally that I had some kind of enough affinity with my brother, where his sadness was also my sadness, and his joy was also my joy, just enough that I started getting that same rhythm of relation, of associations, where Arsenal joy, equals brother joy equals me joy, and so on and so forth. And then it just built from there to now where it's an autonomous thing of its own.
Right.
Yeah. And then, so I think this is definitely, Joe, as you mentioned, addiction, and can these things be more generally applicable and whatnot? I definitely think that works. And that, so one thing that is interesting is he kind of shows how emotions themselves are addictive, which I think if you think about it, it's obvious, but it's I think he makes it more obvious. But then also, yeah, something like a physical addiction, I think, is the most literal way of thinking of it. I mean, or who knows, maybe this is kind of like the parallelism right here is your body. I mean, yeah, you could definitely see it. Okay, so let's go to something like, I don't know, heroin or whatever. So you're addicted to heroin. That's something physical with your body. you will not feel good. Indeed, if you don't have it, if you're addicted to it, but then that's an affective thing or an affective thing. So it's kind of working in that that sort of identity of the two, which I think that's the thing about affect is it's working simultaneously with your mind and your body. So yeah.
You know what it reminds me of is this difficulty of getting people that are in very different ideological camps to have some kind of conversation with one another. So you know, like there have one of the most successful programs in Israel for getting Israelis and Palestinians to talk with one another is to get children to go to camp together. So they'll get Palestinian kids and Israeli kids and put them in summer camp together, and they have these common experiences. And then when they go back home, it's more difficult for them to buy into their sort of their ideological isolation because they've had this common experience. Or, you know, there's groups today that are trying to get trying to get people from, you know, Trumpian right-wing belief systems and people from the opposing belief systems in the same room and talk to one another and have common experiences. And when they discover that they actually have common interests and common experiences and so on, then they can actually begin to build a basis for conversation and trying to actually understand one another rather than just, you know, I mean, you know, my tendency is, you guys are such fucking idiots. But you know, when you actually sit down and you talk with them, it's like, well, maybe they're not complete idiots. But anyway, that, I don't know if that's, but it sounds like maybe a concrete experience of how, you know, you can have these sort of common experiences that can give you a common basis for understanding one another.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a really good example, because so that kind of catches on to also kind of tension here. I'm going to do, since Hunter's not here, I'm going to do maybe a little bit of a Hunter thing and say there's kind of a tension in how this contradiction works, seeking this kind of universal. So, because if you follow kind of the affective course, you can see that in one way it would lead towards what the internet is now, which is, you know, a bunch of echo rooms where indeed I can find people that have common interests with me, and I could be exposed to no other opposing ideas but people that basically just agree with me. Or I could have these common notions that keep, so one thing that Dula says about the common notions is that in terms of their actual application, they would work from the least general to the most general. So they become indeed more common. So you first start with something that's very particular between two bodies, and then you kind of build from that. So I guess you could see it as part of this progression would be, okay, I need to get out of my echo room on, you know, on my Facebook feed, and instead try to engage with other people that are different, or try to build common notions with them. So, okay, well, let's go with me and Hunter and Hegel again. So, you know, on one level, I would not probably really choose to like just go with just read Hegel a whole bunch, but I don't know, something still drives me to want to engage with it. You know, I could just still keep reading things that I completely agree with, or that I believe just completely supports my ideas as they are, or I can try to do something, you know, different that actually allows me possibly some kind of a different common notion that's more common, that's more general, but that requires some kind of a different kind of affective relation the same time. So I think that's kind of what reason is doing, is that it kind of organizes between those. It sort of decides like which one should I do. So society, reason is supposed to organize society so that we have the best encounters, so that we're determined kind of in the best way possible to form, to have good affective relations with each other. And that's Spinoza's kind of basic political idea, but how it works with the rest of his philosophy. So yeah, by branching out to read the 6-page article written by Hegel when he was very young, which was actually pretty interesting. Guess that's some way of building a common notion that is comparable to something like trying to engage with it's not as Hegelians are not as bad as Trump supporters, obviously.
The worst are Hegelian Trumpians.
Oh God.
That just made me smile because you felt like you had to say it. It's like, I think we would have agreed with you without you articulating it.
Yeah.
So I think you have some issues. A little bit.
Yeah, no.
Something lingering there.
Hegel's okay. He's okay.
How about Hegelian Trumpian Randians?
Oh God. Okay, so actually, so the Nietzsche podcast that I posted in the Discord. So this podcast came out with an episode called Nietzsche Against Capitalism. And so I'll just say the very next one was Nietzsche Against Socialism. So, and it's not biased at all. It's not pushing, some like left-wing thing or saying that he's a socialist. It was a really good episode. But I made the mistake of looking at the comments on YouTube and found people that were, Randian objectivists that were incensed by this video that was saying that Nietzsche was in fact not a Randian objectivist. How dare, terrible.
Yeah.
And that definitely gave me some affects. Yeah.
People meme on her, but she's definitely not irrelevant. That's one way to put it.
Oh God.
Yeah. To do with it, however you, I don't know. It's just, I'm not one if that's where you're worried about your head going.
Oh.
So you're fine. No,
No.
not a Randian, but I know plenty of people
Good.
who are very seriously, and they have their arguments. I just don't agree with them.
Rand Paul attributes his political awakening to reading Ayn Rand.
A lot of people do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big favorite among a lot of libertarians.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, so with the libertarians, I'd say so. Ron Paul, Rand Paul's dad. So he was very much like a classical liberal, and was very anti-war. And I actually agreed with a lot of his stuff, but I'm afraid Rand Paul has seemingly none of those traits that his father had that were at least what I consider good.
Rand Paul is like a borderline Hoppian Republican. Like, I mean, they're just very different people. I don't know.
I mean, his father was our congressman here in San Marcos for 8 years. And he was extraordinarily consistent. And if you look at his votes, he voted against tax increases. He voted against all, the kind of like the modern regulatory state. But every single time there was a drug, or I shouldn't call it a drug law, it was an anti-drug law, he voted against it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I do respect him. I have no respect for his son because not because he's an ophthalmologist or whatever, some kind of eye doctor, but I said to a colleague, you're saying this man has these beliefs Rand Paul, but I said, "Are you telling me he never took Social Security? Not Social Security, but Medicare payments?" You know, I would be shocked if he didn't take any kind of Medicare payments. And to me, he's just a hypocrite, just a total hypocrite.
Yeah, I would say the domain of hypocrites and the domain of politicians are
Ain't that the truth?
completely
Finally,
coextensive.
some facts. Let's go.
Yep.
Well, all I would say to you is, I would love to see you in an elected position. And
Nope.
for one
I'm
term,
good.
No,
just
you
one
don't.
term, I would
You
like
would-
you to be in one elected position for one term and then get back to me.
See
Oh
that-
God, no.
No.
Yeah.
Why would I do that?
Okay, so Ed, I actually have a funny I guess a story. Yeah. So when I was first going to Texas State, which was quite a while ago, my friend ran for mayor and I was his treasurer.
Who was
And,
it?
So his name was Daniel McCarthy, or
Oh,
still
yeah,
is.
and he was a student of mine. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Mayor Dan. Yeah.
Yeah. And look, that year that he ran for mayor, he got close to 20% of the vote.
Yes, yeah, he won the
Knocked
campus.
everybody.
He won the precinct on campus. Yeah.
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 The only thing I was concerned about him when he was at our college is it seemed to be the embodiment of the slogan "Better Living Through Chemistry."
Oh yeah. Yeah.
One time I
Okay,
bumped
so
into a
wait,
coffee
okay.
shop and he
So
was just staring there, grinning at me from ear to ear and just like staring. It was like,
okay, so as his treasurer, I can say that his entire campaign was funded by Planet K.
oh yeah, yes, I can believe that.
And so yeah, there's a Planet K in San Marcos. So the owner, even he had to actually would not like return money, but kind of refuse part of it because it would have been too much for certain campaign rules. Like,
Oh.
he basically would have had to put more effort into it if he had taken that money. So instead he's like, nah, I don't want it. So, but his entire campaign was funded something like $400 from Planet K or something. But he won like a decent amount of the vote.
Yeah, but that's so interesting to me that because I bumped into him all the time that you and I never met earlier.
Yeah, he was a good friend of mine. Yeah. I think the last time I hung out with him, must have been, I don't know, like 5 years ago or so, and we went to 6th Street, and I think I got extremely I was in the bathroom just like puking, and there's a lot of
What?
sad
Never
affects
happens.
going on. And I remember Mayor Dan, I didn't like lock the door or something. Mayor Dan coming in and just being like, "Oh, Saladino, what are you doing? Like, come on."
What is,
Disappointed.
Well,
what is the-
like you wanted to do that, like he was chastising you.
Yeah.
This is how you spend your time.
Yeah, no, I got so hungover the next day. I was like throwing up until something like in the evening. It was like 7 p.m. and I was still just could not hold water down. And then it's like, oh, I'm never drinking again. Oh God. And actually, you know what? I've never really gotten really drunk since then. That was the last time. Like it's really like 4 or 5 years ago. So I would still drink a little, but there's something about that night. Yeah, I think that's one of those cases where the association was so strong there that, yeah, sad affects with drinking. But unfortunately, Mayor Dan had to, I guess, go with that. I don't know. The
Well,
association was
I
there.
thought he was living in Wimberley.
I think he lives in Dripping Springs now.
Now, okay. Because I when I got my Facebook account for the first time in the summer of 2016, you just bump into people there, and I don't know if it was a birthday or whatever, and well,
Well, it is almost 8:30, so I gotta bounce, get out of here. It was a pleasure chatting with y'all.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
So we're still meeting next Thursday, even though it's spring break, right? So,
Nevitt, what about Monday? Are
well,
we-
no one has responded except for you, so I'm still planning on. I'm going to read the story and I'll be there. So if maybe
Okay.
it'd just be me and you, but we'll see who else shows up.
Okay. Oh, and the two of you, the two C's, it's everything that rises must converge by Flannery O'Connor. If
Mhm.
I posted the PDF on Discord and sent it out as an email message. So
Oh, is it
Yeah,
not
I
in
saw
the
the email.
is it not in the book?
this particular story is not, because when I wrote up the
Oh.
schedule, I did not schedule spring break, and the main reason was because there's just not enough stories in the book, and I wanted to spread them out a little bit further. So I didn't schedule anything for spring break, but what I sent out that email and then posted on Discord that I suggest we read this story, Everything That Rises Must Converge, which is not in this book. It's in a different book, which, by the way, I don't know, is apparently a reference to something that Taylor de Chardin said. He was the
Okay.
Jesuit theologian who talked about there being an omega point toward which evolution was moving. So that sounds like that might be interesting, given that she named it after that idea. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's going to be Monday for.
very
Anyway,
good.
yeah.
Well, have a fun weekend. Hope you all are safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.